Ryan Lundquist is an appraiser who I've known personally for 15 years. And back in the day, we were running stats together and we were running a lot of the same information. I was always fortunate to be able to bounce stuff off Ryan, have been for a long time. And I sure appreciate that. He's got one of the best blogs in the nation on any market that I've ever seen. And I love the way he thinks and his insights and just learning from him. So
He's a
without any,
wealth of knowledge.
without any
Thanks,
further
guys.
ado, Ryan Lundquist.
Well, thank you so much. And can everyone see my presentation on the screen? Can you hit me up in the chat and let me know that it's all there? That would be fantastic. And also, I have a question in the chat. I just want to start out and say, how is the market so far this year? Hot, cold, normal for January? Hard to read. Let me know what you think. But we just got done with quite the housing market, and today what I want to do is unpack, where we went, where we're at right now, maybe some ideas for 2026. I want you to get two things from this presentation: a realistic sense for how things are right now, but I want you to walk away with some hope, especially if you work in real estate, for crushing it this year. And so people are saying hot, normal, normal, maybe less than last year. But really, when we look at the housing market, it is just, this is basically what sales volume looks like. It fell off a cliff over the past 3.5 years, and this is why it's been so challenging. But when you look, the stunning part to me is that when you look at the annual numbers from 1999 onward, we've now been lower for longer than what we had during the great financial crisis. And so if you've thought, hey, real estate has been really hard, well, yeah, because volume has been prolonged low. And someone says the market's warm. And this is kind of what realtors look like, the difference in 5 years, what a difference it can make. Appraisers to every single real estate professional. But there's brewing optimism. Remember last week, rates went from 6.2% to 5.99%, and then all of a sudden the market is on fire, and we're just going to see this crazy market. Get ready for the competition, right? Did you see that on social media? I certainly did. And I posted about rates dipping, below 6% momentarily also. But there's a lot of glowing optimism. And, here's comes from a guy who's sort of a prominent, real estate or realtor in the country. And he says, if you've been hanging on, his last sentence, the compression is over, the explosion is coming. And I kind of look at that language, and as I think about 2026, explosion isn't the right word, I don't think, and I want to unpack that. Okay. NAR has, predicts double-digit growth in home sales in 2026 and price growth. And I would say that it feels overly optimistic. And if anything, I think the tagline for 2026 is this: a little less disappointing, right? Am I right? Am I right? Let me know in the chat. But on a positive side, a little bit better. Okay. And I think in today's market, we want to gauge small change and maybe give those golf claps, but they actually feel like maybe a standing roaring ovation going, we're seeing a little bit of improvement. All right. But when you look at monthly sales volume, let's unpack this, or excuse me, annual volume. We had less than 1% growth this past year. It was technically 0.6%. Definitely one of the lower years, but a step in the right direction. And when we back up and look at 12 counties, we can look, there was 21.4 billion in price volume. All right. And there are about 34,000 sales. And so if you're here today and you work in real estate, the only question that matters is not how many sales are missing, how many buyers are gone. It's where are buyers and sellers participating in the housing market today? That's the only question that ever matters in any market. All right. A little bit of hopeful news. We have seen affordability improve slightly. This comes from California Association of Realtors for our largest local county. At the very beginning of 2020, 47% of households could afford a median priced home. And you see that really tank, not a shocker, to 23%. But in recent time, we're actually back up to 28%. Okay. When we zoom out, this is really low. Okay. Affordability is not great out there. We all know that. You go to a mortgage calculator, it's just expensive to buy a home. But we want to give a golf clap to go, it looks like a step in the right direction. All right, that's what I told the Sacramento Bee. I said the good news for buyers today is mortgage rates are slightly lower right now, and so are prices. Granted, it hasn't been enough to attract a flood of buyers off the sidelines, but this seems like a step in the right direction. I think that's a good way to look at it. But when we look at pendings, we have seen a little bit of change in light of slightly lower mortgage rates. And so these are monthly pendings from January through December in 2023. And I want to show you 2024. Do you see how it's maybe a little bit higher in 2024? And let me show you 2025 in the Sacramento region. Do you see how it was sort of up for the start of the year in blue, and then we kind of entered this uncertain period. There's more uncertainty. Buyers kind of backed off, but then rates went down a little bit, and we've seen a little bit better numbers for the past 5 months. And so it just shows that rates dip a little bit, it starts to make a little bit of a change. All right, now. Meanwhile, in the background, and this is not a partisan statement, I'll get to Newsom, but we have sort of, Trump's, album, his vinyl album that he's releasing, the greatest hits of housing ideas. And, there's 4 songs: the 50-year mortgage, the portable mortgage, ban institutional investors, buy 200 billion in bonds. And it seems like, policy to say, well, can anything stick? And they've already walked back. 50-year mortgage is not happening. Portable mortgage is not happening. Institutional investors, I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But, I think this shows that the public is, hungry for affordability. Can politicians deliver or not? We'll see. But we have Newsom on the other side that's also joined, so this is a red and blue thing in blaming big investors for the housing crisis. Now, in the chat, I'd love to hear, do you think big investors are the culprit behind a lack of affordability? Because this has been the prominent narrative. We're struggling with affordability, and this meme I think says it all. That it's all about institutions. Now, in some parts of the country, big investors are making more of a dent. They've basically been dormant in California for years. Okay, but when we back up, here's an image of where Invitation Homes, our largest landlord in Sacramento, where they own homes. And when you get the PDF, you can, click on that link in there, and you can check out all throughout California where they own, and it's stunning. Okay. And so we look at this and go, wow, that's pretty wild. And so if institutional investors kept up the pace of purchasing over the next 100 years, this is something we want to talk about, we want to critique. All right. But this image comes from the State Library of California. You can see, when did Invitation Homes purchase their homes? And you can see 2012 and 13 were the dominant years. But really, since prices exploded after 2020, they've basically been dormant. And so here we are with incredible price growth, but it hasn't been because of institutions being involved. Isn't this a cool visual? And then I have the link below if you want to check that out. All right, but backing up, this is one of my favorite quotes with both red and blue. And here's a professor from UC Riverside that says, attacking institutional investors is the latest iteration of appearing to do something without actually doing anything for affordability. And that might sound harsh, but as soon as politicians on both sides started speaking out about institutions, I'm like, you know what? This is a way for them to scapegoat something happening in the market, probably without actually accomplishing anything for affordability. All right. And so I'm not saying that we shouldn't have this discussion. I actually think that we should. All right. But if we want to do something about affordability, it costs $109,000 to build every single new home in the Sacramento region. And I think on the local level, we need to have these conversations. What does it look like? Right. Can I get an amen? All right. All right. But really, when we think about 2026, there's a lot of issues. And I think in real estate, sometimes we focus so heavily on rates, where it's all about what rates do. But I think we want to back up and go, no, it's also about the job market, the economy, a sense of uncertainty that really was a curveball for last year's housing market. Okay. Consumer confidence, and also government stimulus. What if the Trump administration does buy 200 billion in mortgage bonds? Does that make any difference? And so we look at these different layers and then ask ourselves, what would this mean for the market? And I see you, Chris. Thanks for the amen. But we are starting 2026 at a softer place. Do you see the number of active listings in the region at the end of December every year? So we have about 14% more actives. And so in the midst of all the optimism and we're going, man, this is so great. We finally saw rates dip below momentarily 6%. We just got to realize we have more listings this year. Not really a lot more, but that could make a difference. We're still not back to 2019 levels. All right. But here's what to expect for the spring season. This is a picture of sort of the normal trend. And you can see when listings start to hit the market. January through December, do you see our lowest month is December? And then we start to see the market in January starts to pick up from December, the lowest month. And we basically have one of the lower months out of the year. A little bit more in February, and then March, the market starts to hit its stride where buyers for the first couple months are going, where are the listings? We're desperate for them. Where's the good stuff? Okay. The good stuff is coming. All right. Monthly pendings are a similar vibe. The low point is December for buyer activity. And then January picks up a little bit from December, and it's sort of a slow burn. February more, and then really hits its stride in March. My sense is that the housing market locally, it's most competitive between the Super Bowl and Mother's Day. And so we have this moment where listings and pendings, they're at its most competitive point within that time frame. Okay. So thanks to watching 2026. Here are things on my mind. I'd love for you to comment on anything in the chat as you'd like. I'd say affordability is poised to improve slightly, right? It's likely we'll see more closed sales, which I think is very positive news. I think NAR is maybe too aggressive at 14%, hopefully, a few percent, just a smidge more. There will be more strength at the highest prices, which I'm going to get into. Insurance is still going to be a massive issue. Are you seeing that in your escrows, in your neighborhood? Absolutely. That's what I'm seeing. The condo market's poised to be softer than the detached market, just like 2025. Some sellers and buyers are going to wait and see due to uncertainty. I'll unpack that. Some sellers will list reasonably after not selling in 2025. Does anyone have listings that are coming back to the market this year? Did you know about 20% of the listings so far that have hit the market in 2026, they're sort of relistings from last year? All right, 80% new. Sellers will struggle with overpricing. Expect more short sale listings, especially if prices dip. Buyers will continue to be hypersensitive about condition, location, and price. It's going to be multiple offers or crickets, very quick attention for that right property that's priced well, that checks all the boxes of what people are looking for, or properties are going to linger. Okay. Expect the spring season to start at a softer place. Like I said, we have 14% more active listings. Let's just be realistic about that. People will move for lifestyle reasons. That's the trump card in today's market. Okay. Buyers are looking for an edge, loan assumptions, buy downs, dream for all, whatever you can. If you work in real estate, pay attention, especially to loan assumptions. They're a unicorn product, but buyers want all the help they can get. Okay, then I'd say this, that a softening era is poised to continue unless something interrupts that trend. And we're in a place where prices did dip last year by a few percent. I'm going to show you that. But we've entered, I would say, this softening era. And can something jolt us out of that? If seller behaviors, changes and sellers no longer come to the market, or if there's government stimulus, then maybe so. But I would say that we're in a place where supply grew faster than demand last year, not a huge imbalance. And I expect for supply to grow more than demand this year. Okay, to be determined. We'll see what the future happens. And thanks everyone for the comments. I appreciate it. The slides will be available from Joel and Mike, or you can send me an email, no sweat. Insurance is hyper local, absolutely. I'm going to show you every county, what's happening also. Now, let's get into prices though. What do you notice when we look year over year for the entire region? Do you see how traditional metrics are down about 2.5% for the most part? And so this is something that we haven't seen for a number of years, but it's definitely showing up in the stats. When we look at our largest local county, similar vibes, okay? Most local counties are showing this, all right? Here's a different way to look at it. You can see the median price, and I'm going to show you some other metrics in a little bit. But you can see the year started out January through February where we were up compared to last year. And then there was this inflection point. And do you see how we were basically down for the rest of the year in our largest local county? Yeah, that's a good way to visualize the market. Here's Placer County. What do you notice about Placer though? Do you see how it's kind of like hit and miss? sometimes smaller counties, like, the numbers can bounce around more. And so we have to be a little bit careful right now with smaller counties in light of fewer sales happening. It's kind of like Nintendo cheat codes, up, down, and it's all over the place when we look at the stats. Did anyone get that reference? Maybe, maybe not. Here's El Dorado County, and El Dorado County even bounces around even more. And El Dorado might have 100 sales. Contra code, Thomas, you're my guy. You're my guy. El Dorado has about 100 sales a month, and so the stats are just going to be all over the place. Okay, so it's sort of like if we're not careful, our narrative can be too influenced by the numbers. The market's down. Just kidding. It's up. No, it's flat. We're back, baby. We're so back, and we've got to be careful with that. Okay. Um, but here's when we look at annual stats, I want to show you the difference between annual and recent ones. Annual stats are sort of when we compare all of last year compared to this year. Okay, there's pluses and minuses. But when we do that, we can see that the average sales price increased 0.8% from last year to this year. Okay. And when we look at the median price, it was exactly the same in all of 2024 compared to all of 2025. All right. But and here's annual change by county. And so again, all of 2024 compared to all of 2025. And it's generally, you could see most areas are up slightly or down just a tad. All right. But when we look at December stats in all our counties, do you notice the difference? Here's annual, and then here's December. Do you see how in most local counties they're actually down? And so one of the dangers in real estate is if we back up, when we look at the big picture, we might miss what's going on right now. Now, imagine this, track with me here. Is anyone else trying to lose weight this year? I am going to lose 30 pounds by the time I turn 50 in October. I got 4 pounds down, baby, and I'm going all the way. But imagine, let's talk about weight. Imagine for the 6 months of the year, first 6 months, you lost 30 pounds. Okay. But then imagine the last 6 months of the year, you gain 25 back. You could look at the whole year and be like, man, I am down 5 pounds. But what's the real trend? The real trend is a season of gaining. Okay. And so if we only look at the big picture, we might lose sight of what's happening right now. And that's exactly what we want to do with stats. We don't want to like gloss over and be like, hey, look, prices haven't dipped at all. Look at the average, look at the median. No, but when we zoom in, we can go, oh, there has been change. Does that make sense, everyone? Maybe this is too hyper specific. But look at El Dorado. El Dorado's down 7.3%. And the temptation is to be like, man, the market's tanking. But when you compare the size of homes, look at last year in El Dorado, they were 2,678 square feet. And then look at this year, they're much smaller. And so they were 16% larger last year. And so sometimes we have to just step back and go, well, is there a difference in price and is there a difference in size that's influencing some of these numbers, particularly in smaller areas, all right? Now, let's look at some price indexes because we don't want to just look at the median and average. Those are not enough in today's market. So here's Zillow, their price index. I'm not saying that this estimate is credible. I'm saying I want to look at Zillow's price stats, their index. And so here's the Sacramento region down 2.3%. This goes through November. We don't have their December stats yet. And here's condos. That's detached homes. Condos are down 2.8%. Does it surprise anyone that condos are down more? No, probably not, right? Here's homes.com, and look at Sacramento through November. They would say down 2.6%. The median and these other indexes, they're really tracking and saying about the same thing, all right? How much are prices up since March 2020? Zillow's index would say 29.5% in the Sacramento region. And look at a traditional metric, the median, up 30.6%. So aren't those about the same? Yeah, absolutely. How much are prices down since mid-2022? 7.2% from Zillow, and then 8.8% from the median price. And so if we said, yeah, prices are down 7 to 8%, that seems about right. But here's my advice. Don't be rigid about these price metrics. Could the market be different if you're looking at condos or detached homes or $3 million properties versus under 500,000? We have to look to the comps. Don't be rigid about applying this to every part of the market. All right. And if you have questions as I'm talking, I'll pay attention to the chat. That's no sweat. But really, this has been the narrative that, the market is changing quickly. We're crashing, but I think actual price change has been a really slow burn. It's incredible that after 3.5 years that we're down 7 to 8%. That's actually really stunning with how unaffordable we've been. All right. But here's what I'm seeing a lot more. And you can let me know in the chat if you are also seeing this. I'm having more conversations with would-be sellers or owners who bought about 4 years ago that it doesn't look like they really have any equity. And here's sort of what I mean. When you look at the shape of the median price, this kind of shows like imagine buying recently, and then you look back at various points where the market was at a very similar level. Okay. Now, if you bought at the low point in 2022, you're probably, up. You bought at the beginning of 2021, you probably have lots of equity still. But if you bought it in later 2021, maybe not. And so we want to just be aware of, this showing up in real life escrows. Here's someone, I want 20% more than what I paid in 2021. Good luck, right? Um, but when you look at median price change for the last quarter of 2021 in 12 local counties compared to this most recent quarter, what do you notice? Do you see dollar change and the percentage change? How it's pretty subtle. Okay. There's not a lot of change. It's not exponential. And so it just reinforces that this is what we're going to see in a lot of situations with the comps. All right. I hope that's helpful. I hope you like that. But here's kind of the vibe. This is what it's looked like, where we have a minor portion of sellers listing homes, and in the background, we've had a lot of owners that are sitting on homes. Okay. And this has made a real difference in the market. I would say that this is why the housing market has basically felt stuck over the past 3 years, right? New listings. Is everyone still with me here? I can't see your faces. I have no idea. These are new listings from January through December, and this is the low point of seller activity where sellers were holding back. Thanks, Lee. Thanks, Justin. Appreciate it. And in 2024 in red, do you see how sellers started to wake up? They started to thaw out more. This is fantastic news. And so 2025 happened. And let me just show you this. This is so important. During the first 5 months of the year, sellers thawed out. We were going, this is wonderful. The number of new listings last year up 20%. But then something happened in April. Tariffs, more economic uncertainty. And that's not a partisan statement. It's a reality for how things are affecting the market. Do you see the blue bars after May, how they really started to go down? And then the last 4 months of the year, besides December, we actually had fewer new listings compared to 2024. And so we had this trend of sellers waking up. Then all of a sudden, sellers pulled back and didn't come to the market. Did you notice that? I mean, yeah, that's pretty stunning. And so what happens here is an X factor. And the hope in 2026 is that we'll see a reversal of this. Okay. It helps the market become more affordable when we get more listings. Like this is exactly the opposite of what we want to see in the housing market because it makes things tighter. Okay. Here's what it looks like in a meme form. And you can see the uncertainty, and listing a home, it's really changed the dynamic, last year where we were seeing sellers thaw out. Okay. And thanks, JC. Yeah, send me an email, no problem. Here's what it looks like. Here's a different way. Do you see how during the beginning of the year, the first 4 months, like I said, we're up about 20% in new listings going, this is great news. We're seeing more listings hit the market, but all of a sudden, more uncertainty, sellers pull back, and you start to see these numbers go down. Okay. The good news in December, we did have about 10% more new listings compared to the previous year. But in 2026, we really want to see these numbers get up again. All right. Aubrey Plaza delisted her home. Okay. It feels like delist was like the word of the year in real estate. In the chat, if you want, did anyone have a listing that didn't make it to the finish line? I'm guessing quite a few people did. And why did people pull their homes? What was the deal? When we look at it statistically in the Sacramento region, we had 22% more cancellations last year. And really, the number of new listings only grew by 8%. And so we did outpace the trend. Okay. These numbers were actually up over 30%. But what happened is that listings stopped showing up to the market. And then we ended up at 22%. Okay. Is this the highest ever? Absolutely not. Be careful about, running, saying that this is 2007 all over again. Absolutely not. What's up, Bobby, my commercial friend? Thanks so much. Look at condo listings, though. The rest were detached. What do you notice about condos? Do you see how condos had a higher concentration of cancellations? And so we might look at detached listings. They're not back to 2019 levels yet. Look at condos. They've surpassed what we've seen over the past decade. And so this is a good reminder. Not every part of the market has the same temperature, doesn't? And if you work in real estate, I want you to share this with your upcoming, condo seller. All right. But when we look at buyers, there's a lot of things going on right now. Fear of getting stuck, fear of getting left out, fear of making any decision at all, just paralyzed. I don't know what to do. And also not pictured here, if there was a fourth Spider-Man, there's excitement. The buyers that are here, they know what the market's doing. They have the headlines, and they're, if they find the right house, they're here to engage. Okay, so how long is it taking to sell? I think these are some really interesting stats. Here's a red line in our largest local county. This represents the pre-2020 average. And what we're seeing is that, and this gives a good baseline for comparison. In 2024, though, here's a green line, and you can see that it was basically twinning with the normal trend. Like in December, it should take about 39 days on average to sell. 2024 would be like, we are right on the money with what is normal. Look at 2021, though, in December, 21 days. Okay, it took about half as long. That was a freakish market. Now, let me show you 2025 because this is super interesting. Do you see 2025 in blue? We started out for the first 4 months of the year, very normal vibes. And then all of a sudden, the market peaked 2 months early. Okay, spring came early. And you could see that by the end of the year, it's taking almost 2 weeks longer to sell than the normal trend. And so we're in a market that feels softer today. It's not aggressive like 2021, and we need to keep, having sellers recognize that. All right. Now, here is an article from the Sacramento Bee from December 2007. And here's a quote from an economist that's still around. It says, sales and home prices are in a free fall. The downturn is intensifying. Now, raise your hand if you think we can describe the current market this way. I don't think so, because that's not the vibe. We would say that volume has been really low, but prices have not been in a free fall. All right. So here are home price predictions, and every year I add a new door. And for years now, we've been hearing that prices are going to crash, prices are going to crash, but we haven't had enough supply to see that happen. We have had enough, though, to see prices begin to dip, though. No mistaking, just not a crash. In 2008, in case you wanted to win real estate Jeopardy, we had 8,400 more active listings at the time. So if you logged into MLS at the end of December in 2008, there would have been over 11,000 active listings. So no wonder why that market was able to go down so quickly. What do you notice when we look at supply today compared to supply at the worst moment in 2007? Much different vibe. And so I think a lot of people are expecting 2007, 2008 results with 2025 and 2026 stats. And like, hey, these are two different things. There's no sugarcoating. Okay. When you look at the median price in blue compared to supply in green, do you see how quickly prices were able to decline because there was so much supply? The market has felt very stuck lately. Okay. It's no sugarcoating. It's felt stuck with a little bit of affordability relief, but not much, because supply has been limited. All right. So I'd say that this is a good way to describe it. The market is not crashing like 2007. It's not flexing like 2021, but it's softer than 2019 also. These numbers, all the stats, they're not at a normal level. They're a little softer than normal. Okay. Here's a guy I identify as a seller in 2021, man. This has been a real problem in the market. It's where we're at. I'm hopeful in 2026 that we will get a little bit better, though, because we're 1 year further removed from 2021. Okay. But what stands out to you here? Let me show you some stats. December 2025 sales in the region, below, at, and above. Oftentimes when I present, people are like, oh my gosh, look how many properties sold below. But I want to give you some context. Okay. Let's compare this to 2021. And if you work in real estate, I want you to screenshot stuff like this. I want you to turn stuff like this into a reel on Instagram. I want you to turn this into a blog post. We're so far removed from that market in 2021, aren't we? Okay. And so sellers need to let go. 2026, it's not 2021. I know. I have to share this meme. All right. But when you look, here's the interesting part. December 2025, what year is the market most like? I think 2025 and 2026, they're sort of their own thing. They don't compare perfectly because look, the market is not flexing like 2021. It's not crashing like 2007, but it's also softer than the normal trend. 2019, very normal year. Okay, and so statistically, it reinforces, that slogan that I just shared. Okay, I hope that's helpful. There's a lot of stats here, but what I've found is that this image in particular can be very powerful when shared online as we talk about what is the market like, what does competition feel like. All right, trust me, bro, rates are going lower. We've been hearing that for many years. We have seen some relief this year, thankfully. Trump and Powell, woo, some tension, especially this week, but you're such a loser. Stop keeping rates higher, Jerome. It's been like some serious drama that's been playing out. Okay. But the reality is rates were 7.24% 1 year ago. Okay, what a difference a year makes. And this is why the market's a little bit more affordable right now. Okay. The numbers are still tough in a mortgage calculator, though. All right. And when we think about consumers, all that they're juggling, on paper, we might, have real estate professionals who are like, man, rates are finally below 6%. But then consumers are, still having grocery bills and insurance issues and everything else. The price of gas and eggs are down, which I'm so grateful for. But it seems like the price of everything else is up, especially eating out. Oh my gosh, I can't believe how much it costs. So, um, but meanwhile, real estate agents are like, hey, radical dudes, rates are below 6%. And then the market, I think, is like, hey, I'm carrying a lot right now, right? That was a new meme. I like this one. um, but I'd say for my real estate friends here, stop putting your hope in lower rates, focus on the market that's here. And that's the only thing that matters in any market. Focus on what's here. And Steve says, yeah, restaurant inflation is crazy. I know, I know. I feel for restaurants, and I do my best to support them. It's tough. Who are the buyers? Let's get some clues. Good for your diet. Absolutely, Julian. Thank you. So when we look at the region, what two counties made the most difference in volume this year? We had a little bit less than 1% growth, 0.6%. Do you see how El Dorado and Placer pulled the most weight? Absolutely. Sacramento is by far our largest county, but we had two smaller counties where the most growth occurred. And what I want you to do is over these next few slides, I want you to think about who are the buyers, who are the sellers, where to position your book of business, where to invest, all that stuff. So when you look at El Dorado County, what areas of El Dorado had the most growth as we look down the list? Cameron Park, one less sale. Oh my gosh. Okay, you look at El Dorado Hills, strong volume. Placerville did good. Shingle Springs. Most areas are up. There's a few areas that are down very modestly. I wouldn't make too much of that. Here's Placer County. And what do you notice about Placer? Okay, you see Lincoln, Granite Bay. Hey, Forestville did pretty good. Look at Colfax. Colfax had a good year. Auburn. Okay, the interesting thing about Placer, look at Rockland. Rockland, was definitely down last year. The volume struggled. Volume was actually struggling in Roseville for 3, 4, 5, 6 months during last year, where like volume really went down. But I think builders, lowered prices and they started working with consumers more, and so that volume was able to climb back up. All right, maybe a lesson for all of us there. Here's Sacramento County, various areas, and Sacramento is very hit and miss depending on the neighborhood. Look at downtown is up by 5. East Sac was down a little bit, but down here, Land Park, had stronger volume. Okay, you might look at this and go, the first time buyer market's struggling. Look, Meadowview's down, but then look, Oak Park is up. And so hit and miss depending on the area, where are you going to position your business? All right. Now, the stunning part, you look at fair plan policies in California, no one's shocked here, where you could see exponential growth through 2025. And Laura says, but the MLS volume doesn't include new builders, right? Correct. It only includes list sales where builders actually entered into MLS. Builder volume through November is down about 19% from the year before before, we were missing about 1,200 sales compared to the previous year. That's exactly why builders have really been reaching out to agents and saying, "Hey, we haven't talked for a while. Let's do lunch." And so this has been a big issue. I don't have my builder recap stats yet because they don't have their December stats, but yeah, it was a tough year for builders. But I think that's really good for buyers. Fair plan policies in 12 local counties. Check this out. See the growth from 2024 to 2025, the difference in the number of fair plan policies compare and percentage. It's really stunning. And this right here is unfortunate for affordability, but we look at insurance and it's not just what's happening in outlying fire areas, it's also what's going on in the suburbs and people being canceled from policies sometimes. And so that's a tough thing. Closed sales volume, we want to ask who are the buyers in today's market? About 10% of all buyers or all sales were over 1 million. Okay. You might look someone who is shopping below 300,000. That was 1.6% of the entire market last year. But look at 400 to 600,000. That's about 43% of the entire market is between 400 and 600. So don't sleep on lower price ranges. If you're like, I'm only going to work 1.5 million and above, okay, that's a crowded pond though. Okay, there has been more strength at the top, but more strength at the top there is. That was my Yoda impersonation. But let me show you what I mean. All right. When we look at 2025 in black compared to 2024 in blue, I want you to look at the bars just 800,000 and above. Do you see how this year there were more sales in all of these price buckets? So there's more strength. But do you see what happened the lower we get, you start to see fewer sales. And then, but between 400 and 500, you saw more. And so what it looks like happened is that there's more strength at the top, but it looks like prices softened and that pushed more properties into the 400 to 500 bucket than we saw the previous year. So this is, I think, good news for buyers. This is what we want to see. And remember, if prices, continue to soften, as long as we don't have government stimulus or anything, we should sort of see the sales on this graph move a little bit to the left. Okay, that would be healthy if I got to write the rules. Here's a different way to look at volume. Hopefully everyone's still here. We are sort of winding down. This presentation will be over very soon. But you can see that there was, more growth, percentage growth at the top, and then you're starting to see a little bit more growth at lower prices. All right. But you might look at, wow, 9.15% growth above 1.5 million. Okay, but that represented 42 sales. Like, let's be realistic. But like, good news, there were 228 more sales between 400 and 500 this year. That's, I think, what we want to see. All right. Look at Sun City, Lincoln Hills. This is annual volume over the past 2 decades. What do you notice about Sun City? Very normal volume. Forget that pandemic era 2021 migration one, but you see how this neighborhood is showing a very normal number of buyers. I haven't seen any other neighborhood that's like this locally. There's something in the water in Sun City. It's actually appeal for 55 plus, but I would say that this neighborhood is softened like everything else, but you have a normal number of buyers, right? Pretty cool to see. But what can you do with your equity? Where do you want to be in life? Who do you want to do life with? And I got this from Mike Goby. If you think the market's going down, where do you want to ride down the market? I think these are powerful questions for every seller to ask. When you look at median dollar change from the bottom of the market in 2012 through this most recent quarter, there's profound equity in the marketplace. And so I think everyone needs to focus on or attracting those sellers. There's most sellers on MLS, the vast bulk have lots of equity. Now, some who bought maybe in the last 4 years, it's a different story. And they might not want to lower the price because they're like, I can't lower it without doing a short sale, right? Now, couples getting engaged, we want to look for lifestyle moves. Okay, both of these couples got engaged over the past year. Okay, and hopefully you represent them if they move to Sacramento. But we want to look for, who has incentive to buy, sell, and invest in today's market, regardless of what prices are doing, regardless of rates, death, disease, debt, divorce, diamonds, diapers, all of the Ds in today's market. Okay. My last graph, I'd say that we also want to pay attention to economic carnage. I'm guessing that Dean is going to weigh more heavily there, so I didn't include more economic stuff in my stuff today. But you can see that, behind the scenes, while everyone is like, hey, affordability quality has improved. Consumers are struggling. We're seeing more credit card delinquencies and not so much mortgage, but we're seeing auto loans. And then, did you know that 50 plus years old are the people who are becoming most delinquent with student loans? All right. And starting to wrap up, here's an analyst, a sports analyst. Here are his predictions during the beginning of the football season. And if you follow football, what's wrong with these? Okay. He predicted these two teams would make the playoffs and the others wouldn't. And it basically was the exact opposite of what he thought. And so I think that we're in a place where we want to just concede that it's difficult to predict the future. We all have ideas about the 2026 housing market, but we have to say that now we'll wait and see what happens. Right? 2026 will be awesome no matter what. I think there's reason for hope and optimism, but here's the sobering reality that I want to leave everyone with. I think we're in a market that's going to be difficult, just like 2025. Did you notice last year everything was more challenging, more time on the market? Buyers, walking away last minute. Whether issues with appraisals or whatever, negotiation. It takes more work, everything, and I think we're in that same environment today. Okay, but the positive news. This market is built for professionals, and professionals thrive in a market like today. And so, anyway, that was me. Mike and Joel will have my slides, and you can also email me. I hope this was helpful. I really appreciate the opportunity. So, thank you so much for your time today.